Minneapolis has evolved into a symbol of the fractured state of modern American governance and social cohesion. Since the seismic shifts of 2020, the city has existed in a state of perpetual tension, acting as a laboratory for the most intense conflicts regarding the role of law enforcement and the authority of the state. It is within this charged atmosphere that the death of Renee Nicole Good occurred, an event that initially threatened to become another spark in the powder keg of civil unrest. Good died during a lethal confrontation with federal agents, specifically members of a fugitive task force associated with immigration and customs enforcement. In the immediate aftermath, the familiar machinery of political outrage began to churn. Activists and local critics of federal authority were poised to frame the incident as yet another example of unprovoked state aggression against the civilian. However, the trajectory of this story was abruptly altered by the emergence of a single piece of digital evidence that defied the established political script. A chaotic video from the scene captured a woman, closely associated with the deceased, repeatedly screaming a confession that cut through the noise of the protest. "This is my fault." To understand the magnitude of this admission, one must look beyond the sensationalism of the headline and engage in a forensic analysis of the interaction between personal responsibility and political narrative. The report from Fox News highlights this specific video not merely as a detail of the crime scene, but as the pivot point upon which the entire public perception of the event turns. In the era of information warfare, the initial hours following a lethal use of force are critical. It is during this window that narratives are cemented. Had that video not surfaced, the death of Renee Good would likely have been canonized instantly as a martyrdom, utilized to justify further demonstrations and deepening the wedge between the community and law enforcement. The existence of the video and the raw, unfiltered admission within it forced a collision between the ideological projection of what happened and the grim reality of what actually occurred. The phrase, "This is my fault," carries a profound weight that creates a complex legal and psychological tableau. From a legal perspective, such an admission, captured in the heat of the moment, is often treated as a highly credible piece of evidence known as an excited utterance. It suggests that the lethal outcome was not the result of a unilateral decision by federal agents to open fire, but rather the tragic conclusion of a chain of events initiated or escalated by the civilians involved. It implies that the agents were reacting to a threat rather than creating one. This distinction is paramount in the discourse surrounding police reform and federal overreach. The central argument is often that law enforcement initiates aggression. The admission in the video suggests the opposite in this specific case, that the agents were potentially placed in a situation where they had no choice but to use lethal force to survive. Psychologically, the admission reveals the phenomenon of immediate remorse in the face of irreversible consequence. It paints a picture of a tactical situation gone wrong, likely involving resistance or an attempt to struggle with officers, which spiraled out of control. When the reality of death settled in, the ideological bravado that might have fueled the initial resistance evaporated, leaving only the crushing realization of culpability. This humanizes the tragedy in a way that political slogans cannot. It strips away the abstract debates about immigration policy or federal jurisdiction and reveals the raw, kinetic danger of physically resisting armed federal agents. It serves as a grim reminder that the street is not a debating stage. It is a tactical environment where miscalculations result in mortality. However, to fully grasp why this incident occurred, we must widen the aperture to include the specific environmental factors of Minneapolis. The city has cultivated an atmosphere of intense hostility toward federal enforcement entities. Political leaders and activists have spent years characterizing agencies like IC not as components of the national security apparatus, but as rogue organizations or occupying armies. This rhetoric has consequences. When authority is systematically delegitimized by local leadership, it changes the psychology of the citizenry. If a person believes that the agents arresting them are morally illegitimate, they are psychologically primed to resist. They are told that fighting back is a moral imperative. In this context, the death of Renee Good can be viewed as a downstream effect of the political climate. If the prevailing cultural narrative tells citizens that federal agents are villains who must be driven out, It increases the likelihood that a routine arrest warrant execution will devolve into a shootout or a physical struggle. The woman screaming, "It is my fault," may have been realizing, too late, that the narrative of resistance she perhaps subscribed to had led directly to the loss of her loved one. The tragedy lies in the gap between the romanticized idea of resisting authority and the physical reality of confronting a federal task force trained to neutralize threats. The media dynamics surrounding this event further illustrate the deep polarization of the American information landscape. Fox News utilized this story to reinforce a law and order narrative, using the video to vindicate the officers and critique the anti-police sentiment prevalent in the city. For this outlet, the admission was the smoking gun that proved the agents acted in self-defense. Conversely, the reaction from outlets and groups that typically champion the anti-ICE cause was a sudden and noticeable silence. This phenomenon is known as narrative collapse. When a high-profile incident fails to align with the predetermined roles of victim and oppressor, it is often discarded by those seeking to use it for political capital. Renee Good, once a potential symbol, became an inconvenient anecdote because the facts of her death contradicted the desired story. This selective attention reveals a cynical truth about modern political discourse. Tragedies are only valuable to political actors if they can be weaponized. When the video surfaced, Renee Good ceased to be useful to the anti-establishment movement, and thus her story was allowed to fade. This leaves the family to grieve in the vacuum left by the retreating political circus, burdened not only by the loss, but by the public acknowledgement that the loss was self-inflicted. It exposes the hollowness of a movement that claims to value all lives, but selectively engages only with those that fit a specific grievance model. Furthermore, we must analyze the tactical reality of the at-large arrest operation that led to this event. As discussed in previous analyses of the Minneapolis political situation, the local Separation Ordinance prohibits local police from assisting federal agents. This policy forces federal agents to conduct arrests in the public sphere, in parking lots, on streets, or outside homes, rather than in the controlled environment of a jail transfer. These at-large operations are inherently chaotic and dangerous. They lack the containment and control of a custodial transfer. In an open environment, there are infinite variables: bystanders, vehicles, escape routes, and access to concealed weapons. The death of Renee Good is a direct kinetic result of this operational shift. Had the subject of the warrant been transferred to ICE custody within the safety of a local precinct, as was standard procedure in the past, this confrontation likely would never have happened. The refusal of local cooperation did not save the subject from arrest. It simply moved the point of arrest to a location where the risk of lethal escalation was exponentially higher. Therefore, while the woman in the video claims the fault is hers, a forensic analysis of the policy landscape suggests that the blame is shared by a political class that enacted policies making such dangerous street-level confrontations inevitable. The incident also serves as a stark warning regarding the dangers of the mob mentality and the rush to judgment. In the minutes and hours before the full details emerged, social media was already filling with calls for retribution and protests. The assumption was automatic: the agents were murderers, and the deceased was a martyr. This reflex has become a standard feature of American civic life. We have created a society where outrage precedes investigation. This creates a dangerous feedback loop where law enforcement officers operate under the assumption that they will be presumed guilty regardless of the facts, leading to hesitancy or defensive aggression, while citizens operate under the assumption that they are victims, leading to noncompliance. The video serves as a rare, indisputable anchor of truth in a sea of speculation. It forces the viewer to confront the uncomfortable reality that compliance with the law is the primary safeguard against lethal force. The admission, "my fault," dismantles the intricate sociological theories often used to excuse behavior and brings the focus back to individual agency. It suggests that in that specific moment, a choice was made to escalate the situation, and that choice had a price. Ultimately, the story of Renee Nicole Good is a tragedy of conflicting realities. It is the story of a city at war with itself, where federal laws clash with local ideologies. It is the story of how political rhetoric can intoxicate individuals into making fatal errors in judgment. And it is the story of how the truth, often ugly and complicated, eventually surfaces to disrupt the clean narratives of political operators. The admission captured on video stands as a somber monument to the consequences of this dysfunction. It is a cry of regret that should echo in the halls of city government and in the meeting rooms of federal agencies. It demonstrates that the current standoff between local resistance and federal enforcement is not a sustainable status quo. It is a recipe for continued bloodshed. Until the mechanism of cooperation is restored, and until the rhetoric of demonization is replaced with a respect for the rule of law, we can expect more such tragedies. We will see more chaotic scenes on the streets, more grieving families, and more desperate, belated admissions that the path of resistance led only to ruin. The lesson drawn from this event is that the safety of the community is not served by turning law enforcement into the enemy. It is served by a system where accountability is mutual, where officers are held to high standards, but where citizens also understand that the rule of law is not optional. The video from Minneapolis is a hard look in the mirror for a society that has forgotten this balance. It challenges us to look past the fury and the slogans to see the human cost of our political dysfunction.